Hey, everybody, welcome back to Searching for Political Identity. It is me, Brian Escow. So glad you're here. Thank you for being here. I'm going to kind of rush through this intro, to be honest with you, because I got a dog to take out. Right? She's been a very good girl, and she hasn't gotten much exercise today, and she just sat through an hour-long podcast. So I got to take her out because I got my dad coming. We're going to go grab a burger across the street. Okay, we're doing good things. I'm an adult. I take care of my dog. I see my dad. Hey, look at me. What has happened to me? I guess it's the influence of my beautiful girlfriend who's out of town for the week uh, with her family. The influence of her. I mean, it's been a blissful year. Not only blissful, but a year of growth and stability for me between getting Rosie the dog and Alexa, my girlfriend. And so it's good to have my dad out here in San Diego. Um, Mom is back on the East Coast doing great. So I actually saw her about 2, 3 weeks ago. So introduced her to Alexa. So all good things, man. It's all good. So what to say before I introduce the conversation that I just had? I'll just quickly tell you tomorrow I'm doing an episode with Twitter acquaintance about two topics. Illegal immigration and outer space aliens. So that'll be like a fun one. Put that in the fun category, okay? This one, well, let me not get to this one just yet, because the one what I'm about to introduce to you is a serious episode. But Friday, tomorrow, I have the aliens in every sense of the word episode, and then Sunday, I'm really excited for the conversation I'm going to have with the two authors of a book called My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. I had one of the two authors on a few weeks ago when I had read half the book. Now we're going to have a follow-up conversation now that I've read the book completely. It's on October 6th, which is obviously one day before the anniversary of the horrible events in Israel. So a lot to talk about there with what's going on in Israel, in the Middle East, and what that means for these complicated relationships between not only American Jews and Israel, but American Jews and the Democratic Party. So super relevant to the journey I've been on, and really looking forward to that. And then I've got some other great ones scheduled for later on this month. But let me get to what's coming right now for you. I just had a gentleman named Michael White. He's running for state representative in Arkansas as a libertarian. Um, I've known him for probably a little over a year now on X, and he's a really solid guy, very bright man. You can tell he's one of the best thinkers, not just sharp, but just kind of has deep knowledge and is really good at presenting the arguments why libertarianism is good. And so we finally hooked up. He had a busy night. You know, it's a busy season for his campaign, and so he just had a long day and hopped on the mic with me. And we had a really good conversation about, libertarianism and what it is and why it's the best way to go. And what that means basically is why progressivism is bad, why socialism is bad. So very relevant to, again, my journey coming from the left, having had these leftist values economically, at least beaten into me so hard from such an early age, to hear it told to me that, hey man, those values are actually not good. The idea behind a value is good. You don't want someone to go hungry. You don't want someone to be sick, left unattended, and so forth. But the idea, it's hard for me to wrap my head around still, even though I've migrated to Donald Trump for this election. All things considered, it's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that government really is the problem. Sure, there's a very small role for it, but it really is the problem. So that's what we got into. We got into a couple dimensions of that. I had a lot of topics that I could have asked him about that I would have liked to, but the flow of the conversation was such that, we got to about half of them. But so I'd love to have him back, and I plan to, but probably not before his election. So thank you so much to Michael White for joining me. And I think you will like this episode because if you're watching this podcast, you're interested in political philosophy and me weighing it. So, with that said, I'm going to go take Rosie out, and thank you all so much for being here. And I will see you. Normally, I say I'll see you next week, but I'll see you tomorrow. I suppose I'm likely to go ahead and just publish these episodes as they're coming. I don't have the patience to delay gratification. That's a problem. I should work on that. So I'll probably see you tomorrow for the outer space alien episode. because I'm going to want to push out that Israeli episode on October 6th. So anyway, guys, see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Adios. Michael, how you doing, man? Thank you so much for being here.
Man, thank you for having me. You become famous, right? Like, didn't like Elon retweet you or something?
Dude, how crazy is that?
Yeah.
My friend, one of my best friends is like, I hate Elon now. And all my time on the elliptical is scrolling through Elon and you. It makes me sick. He's doing rockets. He's doing this. And he has time to see your tweet.
Yeah, man.
He's
I
up
mean,
in arms. He said he's going to be a blue hair now. He's back to being a blue hair.
I think I saw that one too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly, he was always kind of a Bernie bro type,
Okay.
and he voted for Trump in 2016, and then abstained from voting in 20, believe it or not. And now, because of my, well, how should I call it? I guess success, you would call it, on X lately. It's been pretty cool, pretty wild.
I think when like the owner of the platform,
it's wild, dude,
retweets something or whatever you call it now after it's X,
quote posting.
I don't know, whatever it is. Yeah, the fact that happens, I think that's success. I think that's like
it's something, man. I think so, and I'm very humbled.
So
and
Elon, if you're watching this, man, we could use some publicity out there, man. Just start hitting that button. Yeah,
that'd be sweet. That'd be super cool.
Would be super sweet.
And he also commented a smiley, laughing face on a joke I did a couple weeks ago, which was pretty vulgar, and I think it did better online. Better not to repeat it. But so we've been following each other for a while, and I have known since I started following you that you're a heavy hitter, man. And I don't mean to build you up, toot your horn, but I know that you're a deep thinker, and so I'm looking forward to talking to you about deep stuff. But also we'll start with the very practical level of what you got going on right now. So thanks again for joining me, man. Looking forward to this.
Man, again, it's really a pleasure to be here with you. I was very excited when you asked me to.
Yeah,
I thought that I had arrived. I have made it.
Yes, I'm now a kingmaker. No, okay.
Yeah, that's right. You might be. So for those out there who don't know me, my name is Michael White. I am running for state representative in Arkansas. And so for many people in the country, you're going, first off, I forgot Arkansas was a state. And secondly, why would I care about a guy named Michael White running for state representative in Arkansas? And the reason you might care is because if you're like 66% of Americans, according to recent polls, you believe there should be a third party in politics. And in the race that I'm in, I have a very good chance of being the next state representative in this district. And I'm running as a libertarian. I'm a libertarian running as a libertarian. This is a two-way race between myself and my Democrat opponent. Roughly 15,000 people are going to vote in this election in my district, and it'll be decided by a couple hundred votes. That's how tight the race will be. It originally was flipped from Republican to Democrat 4 years ago by 24 votes with 17,000 people voting. That's how tight of a district it is. So you might find that interesting because I believe only 6 or 5 times in history has a libertarian running as a libertarian occupied a state legislature seat. There's a lot of libertarians that win offices. You just don't hear about them often because they're local. They're school board, city council, JP, things like that. And so they don't get a lot of publicity and a lot of headlines. Of course, not at a federal level has it yet ever happened. And again, only 5 or 6 times at a state legislature level. So this is a really, I think, very important race. I think this is a very like a proof of concept almost sort of election. And so that's who I am in a nutshell and why I'm here. There's some other more boring things about me, but what I did in business and the fact that I'm a husband and a father and just kind of a normal person like many people.
What did you do? What was your business, if you don't mind me asking?
So I operated Verizon wireless stores throughout the Southeast.
I didn't see that coming. Okay.
Yeah, I opened my first store in 2006, October 2006. I was 24. And at the time, it was Alltel Wireless. I don't know if you probably don't even know who that was. That was a regional carrier based here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was living in Louisiana at the time. And really, it's kind of an interesting story. I'll just tell. Let's go through it. Yeah. So I was in college, and all of a sudden, I have a baby on the way, right? And so that's it. That's like okay. And
I bet.
And living in the South and growing up in the South in that sort of era, and it's weird to say era because it seems like we're not that far from it, but it was pretty customary that you would become married and then you would be, this is what you would do. And so that's what we did. And also, it was, hey, if you're married, you're a man now. You can't depend on mom and dad anymore. We're not here to give you, go make your own path.
Wow.
You made your bed, lay in it. And so
Wow.
my young wife and I were living in like a little 1-bedroom apartment, and I needed to get a job. And so I got a job at Walmart across the street because I could walk to it, which was important because we only had one car, and I could walk there, and it was also across from school. So I could do all these three things, and that was going to work. And I worked in the photo lab of all places. They put me in when you used to develop film. For anyone out there of a certain young age, you don't even remember that probably. And so I developed film. And then one day my manager comes to me and says, Michael, we're going to start selling cell phones in Walmart. I said, wow, that's weird. I mean, I don't even have a cell phone. Most people didn't back then. And she says, I don't know anything about that. And I said, well, I don't either. And she was like, well, no, you're going to do it. And so I started selling cell phones in Walmart. And one day I was there, and a gentleman, this is coming up on my daughter being born. This is probably right after the holiday season of 2000 and I guess 3. And this gentleman comes up to the thing, and he says, I'm looking for Michael White. And I said, well, that's me. And he says, I'm from Alltel Wireless in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I've been wanting to come and see you. And I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know what you guys are here for. He goes, no, he said, this one single Walmart, your sales ID is outselling any of our retail store reps in the entire country. You're our number one sales rep in the entire country. And there's no Walmart that's doing this. What are you doing? And I said, well, I'm just doing my job. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I'm told to stand here and talk to people and help them out, ask them for referrals, ask what, be here after the sale. And he was like, that's amazing. What can I do to help you? And I said, well, you can put in a good word for me at the call center, because I applied to a job. There was a call center that was opening up down the street. It was going to be like $11, $12, $13 an hour. That was big money for me back then at this age, in my mind. And he said, oh, I can't have you do that. And I was like, why? He's like, well, because we have an agreement. I can't have you go from Walmart to a corporate employee. And I was like, oh man, well, and he said, also, you won't be reporting numbers to me anymore. He said, but I do have a dealer opening up a store across the street, and she's looking for somebody really good to work there, and she pays commission and a decent wage. And so I started working there. Long story short, manager, district manager for that company, helped open another company get started. And while I was doing that, I realized that I could do the same thing. And so long story short, in October 2006, I opened my first store that was mine, and built that across multiple states. I sold that company in 2016. Did very, very well. Well enough that I was able to sort of semi-retire. I'm not independently wealthy, but I don't have to work, which is nice. Of course, my wife has a really good job too, so that makes it really easy. And but yeah, I mean, that was kind of how that all went. And of course, during the process of that, I did many other ventures, got involved in commercial real estate, developed shopping centers, did all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, it was a pretty fun run. You never know where things are going to bring you. I don't know how many people were selling cell phones in Walmarts throughout the United States in 2002, 2003. I don't have a number, but I have a feeling I'm probably the only one that went on to do what I did. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about the world and how things really work, and got to employ thousands of people.
Wow.
Dealt with tons of vendors. I mean, we had millions and millions of dollars in sales, and so yeah, it was very very forming. It was a real part of who I am today.
Wow. And all spurred. Well, I mean, I don't want to say all spurred, but by necessity, you had to strap down, and you did. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've been running for office for how long now?
So in 2022, I ran for U.S. Congress, and as a messaging race, I was in a televised debate that did pretty well. You can go to YouTube and look up Michael White debate Arkansas. So I wasn't under any impression of winning that race. That was not to win. I was not going to win. It was a 3-way race. It's a federal level election. That was not going to happen, right? And this cycle came around, and long story short, no Republican ran. We had, and I say we, the Libertarian Party of Arkansas, had recently changed a petition the legislature for a change in the ballot access bill. And we had a new ballot access bill that allowed us basically to file our candidates after the primaries for the Democrats and Republicans. So we would know which districts were unchallenged. And it just so happened that this district was going to be unchallenged. And my wife and I, prayed about it and thought about it for a good 5 or 6 months before November of 2023, when we would know for certain if this was going to be an unchallenged, election. And that was kind of the answer that we arrived at. Was
So it's been under a
yeah,
year for this
yeah,
cycle.
under a year. Yeah, I
It's
filed in
under a year.
I filed in February of February this year, February
Right.
2024. So yes,
Right.
under a year. Yeah,
Okay. I'm just trying to understand kind of how this works. And so,
right.
because I know this is a very busy time for you, that's what it sounds like.
It is very
Right
busy.
before we hopped on the mic, you were just saying how you're busy as hell right now. So
Yeah.
tell me a bit about where you're at in the campaign right now, what you're doing.
Yeah, so we've knocked on again over 3,500 doors so far. That's when it was a big part of the campaign for many, many months, getting out there and just meeting people. And as we approach election day, we have 14 days of early voting in Arkansas. I'll go ahead and say that, from October 21st until November 5th. And so there's a lot of voting and a lot of time to cover. And as we approach that, we're just getting everything in, visibility, volunteers, following up with people, text messaging campaigns, mailers, all that kind of stuff. And of course, it's like running any other advertising campaign. What makes it a little bit more interesting is it's incredibly time sensitive. Other than like Black Friday and certain holiday sales in my term in industry, I kind of had a little bit of wiggle room of when I was doing something, right? And
Mm,
so if something was delayed a couple days, it wasn't that big of a deal. Of course, it was always crunch time when you had something that was time sensitive, and you
right.
couldn't afford any mistakes. And this is sort of like that. So we have a lot going on. There's a lot that requires my attention, and so yeah, long days, but it's fun. I like it.
That's cool. That's cool. So, okay. Well, thanks for making the time. So, what then? You're selling cell phones. When do you become attracted to libertarianism? What is your hook?
Um, I would say that probably there. I think the seeds of this idea were planted many years before. I was 19 years old when the towers fell. I was
Mm,
I was living in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was a Tuesday or a Thursday. I can't remember exactly which. I need to go look it up and find out. But I remember it was a Tuesday or Thursday because I had a biology class, and I got up that morning and went to my biology class. There's no social media. I didn't have a TV. We didn't have
How old
cable.
were you?
I was 19.
19.
And so I walk into this class, and this was like a pretty large introductory seminar class that would have like 100, 200 people in it. It was big, in a big auditorium. And there was like 6 people in there. And I was like, is this like the wrong day? Did I get the days messed up? And there's some people talking about this. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, yeah, a plane hit something. I'm like, okay, that's crazy. And then the professor walked in and says, no, she said, in case you haven't heard, planes have been flown into the Twin Towers in New York.
Mm,
We think we're under attack.
mm,
You guys are free to go. Take care of yourselves and your family.
wow.
That was like the message.
Right.
And that's how I found out about it. And so, of course, went to the student union, watched actually a TV that had cable. Everybody, of course, is huddled around watching it. And then I went to work at a pizza restaurant that was across the river from there. And there was nobody doing anything. Nobody was coming to buy pizzas. And me and my buddy were outside in the back hanging out. And we hear planes coming. And if you remember that day, all planes were grounded. All air traffic was. So the
Mhm.
fact that we're hearing planes is we're obviously, everybody's like, what is going on?
Right. Right.
Are we next? Right? Like, what's so important about Bossier City, Louisiana? Well, what's important about Bossier City, Louisiana is Barksdale Air Force Base is there. And when the president was being secreted around the country, he flew into Barksdale Air Force Base.
Hmm.
And so we saw Air Force One like flanked by fighter jets land at the Air Force Base, and come overhead, and we knew where they were going. And so then we drove up there,
Hmm.
and I don't know what we thought was going to happen. I don't know if we thought they were going to like let us in, like it was going to be like, hey, come see the president. I don't know what
Right.
we
Right.
thought, but we turned onto like the highway, and there was like tanks like on the highway, like in like a highway that I'd driven on my whole life. My parents had or I had. A place that I'd gone to air shows at, a place that, I had gone to the officers club, to the swimming pool with friends who had, dads in the Air Force or moms in the Air Force. And all of a sudden, this place was not this fun, interesting, you know, location. It was like this show of force. I mean, there's planes, machine gun emplacements. I mean, sandbags. I mean, the whole nine was out for this. And I think that kind of crystallized something in my brain at that moment where I realized that like the world was never going to be the same.
Mm.
And that what show of force really looked like what government force really could actually occur in a very
Here's
quick
our
time.
teeth.
Yeah, here we are. I mean, and this is all in your own home city in just a few
Right.
hours.
Right.
You've gone from a busy highway to like here's tanks from Fort Humbug.
Wow.
And so as I got into business and industry, I kept running into the same sort of problems. And there's like really sort of three types of problems that you'll have in business. One will be market problems. Okay. And these are timing, supply demand, where people are and their spending habits. There's not a lot you can do to change market problems. What you have to do is adapt to market problems. That's what you have to do. Then you can run into people problems. And I would always say, if I didn't have people problems, I would have very few problems. People problems are anything from someone not showing up to work, or somebody arriving late, or whatever it was, or a poor customer, or someone else. It doesn't matter. People problems. And then you have government problems.
Hmm.
And government problems, I realized, were the hardest to solve. And they arose for sometimes the absolute dumbest reasons. I could understand the market problems. I could realize if we were in a recession, or if it was holiday spending time, or people had more money or less. I understood people were imperfect and people are people. And then government, well, what's government? Well, government's people too. They're imperfect, right? But now they have a power of the badge and a gun, and they can take your stuff and they can hurt you and they can throw you in a cage. And so now you have really incompetent people, imperfect people. And again, sometimes very competent and very good. But if you have ran across, unfortunately, an incompetent or imperfect one, you can have a really bad time. And so, especially when you're building out things and you're waiting on permits and occupancy, and you're dealing with everyday changing regulations in a very regulated industry,
Right.
like communications is. And so I just realized that a lot of my cost and a lot of things that were in my way of growing my business were government issues. And so I think at the time that I would have called myself probably a conservative. I think as a young man, I think that, and I don't think that I read, the canons of conservative thought or anything. I think that I just probably would have called myself a conservative. I kind of maybe fell in that line. And I watched a documentary in 2007, maybe, or 2000. Yeah, it's 2007. It's From Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo. I would highly recommend you watch it. It's kind of one of those documentaries about like if income taxes are legal or not, right? Ron Paul makes an appearance in it. And it got me thinking about the tax system and how taxes worked. And I remember saying one day during the financial crisis, when our creditors were cutting our limits and we hadn't done anything wrong and we were paying on time, and I had excellent credit history as a business, and we're having to be tightened back, but I'm watching billionaires on Wall Street get bailed out. And I looked over at a guy that I was employing, who was one of my ended up being my probably longest term employee. He worked for me as a general manager of mine. And I said, it'd be great if we could just go out there and just make people give us money. Right. And,
right.
And I think that was like what turned it in my head. I realized very quickly, okay, there's something here. And so I began reading about libertarian thought, about why we got to where we are, why society operates the way it operates currently, where this might be going. And so again, slowly but surely, I just kind of came to where I am now. I think we're always, you have this show where you say you're on a path of discovering your political identity. I think everyone is all the time. Yeah. I don't claim to have it all figured out. I guarantee you, if you ask me in 4 years, if something's changed in my views, there will be something that has changed in my view. And I think that if it's not, you're probably not doing something right.
Right.
You're just always kind of be adapting and changing, because the world's always changing. But yeah. And as I just, again, like I said, when I sold my company, I had a lot more time. I built a cabin, on a river in the woods, and traveled a lot, and had a lot more time for reading, a lot more time for reflecting and contemplating, and just sort of realized, wow, a lot of our problems in America, a lot of the things we fight about are because there's government force and coercion, and we're upset because we're going to have to live with what 51% of people want us to live with. And we don't really have a choice. And so that's why we're so angry, and there's so much vitriol, and this hyperpartisanship continues to grow. And I think that I sort of war gamed that potential out in my head, really, again, at the start of Trump's presidency in 2016. Like I said, I just sold my company in September of that year, and he's elected, of course. And
you're ready to go. You're like, all right.
I mean, yeah, I'm good either way, right? I mean, so I actually was in Chicago the day after he like November 9th or whatever, I guess the day after the election. I went to see a buddy in Chicago, and there was like protest on TV that was down at Trump Tower, and we went down there, and there's only like 8 people, but they had the cameras like all in their face, like it was a
Right.
big deal. You know, I was
Right.
like, oh yeah, the media might be lying to us. Go figure. So that's kind of how I arrived at it. That's a long way of saying, hey, I think that I just started discovering the truth by just asking questions and seeing the world for what it was.
Interesting. So it seems to me that we can think about politics, whether you're on the left or the right or a libertarian, in like 3 basic ways, like economics, social issues, and foreign policy.
Yep.
I don't know if that tracks for you, but yeah, it sounds like you have come to the conclusion. It sounds like I'm talking to a libertarian, which is to say, you believe that the government is pretty much an unnatural thing for the most part, an unnatural thing and a counterproductive thing. And I need
No,
to
not
no,
necessarily. Yeah,
okay,
I think that government's probably a very natural occurrence. I think the question that we need to answer is what is the proper role of government in a free society?
that's
And
the
there's a
second. That's the second. That's the title of my first actual episode. The first episode I did 3.5 years ago while in law school was called Intro. Second episode was the proper role of government, and that's the scope of the conversation. And it's really always been that. So tell me more.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question,
Yeah.
Brian. Do you think that you own yourself? Do you own yourself?
Yes.
I
Yes.
would hope you'd say
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm just trying to give it a solid.
yeah, I would hope you'd
Okay.
say yes because
Yeah.
if you said no, then you would basically be saying that someone else has a greater claim
Yeah.
to your life than you,
Right.
right? Okay.
Right.
Now you can give yourself away. You can have somebody else own you if you want to. I mean,
Right.
my
Right.
wife might say that she owns me, and I might tend to agree sometimes, depending on what day of the week it is.
But are we born free? That's the question.
And so we're gonna get there, right? We have to ask another question: what is a self? What is that? We have to. I think definitions and words really matter because these are concepts, and I do believe that some concepts arise mutually. Many of them do. Life and death, dark and light, sweet and sour. There's these things that you can't have one without the other. They
Mm.
almost need the other side of it to be a definition, right? So, what is a self? Well, I think one of the definitions is, well, they're not others, right? Myself, other.
Mhm.
Okay, then so what are others? Well, others are you either think that they're valueless or you think they're other selves,
Mhm.
that they have their own self, right?
Right.
Okay, so okay, I'm a self. There's these other selves. We know that exists, right? I say that I own myself. Clearly, we're biological entities, right? I mean, that's probably the first definition we would give is that hey, we're breathing. There's all sorts of processes going on, cellular respiration that keeps us alive, and void of nutrition, sustenance, oxygen. We will die. We will cease to live, or some sort of again failure of function or organ or structure organically. We would cease to live, and so okay, all right. So I'm alive. I'm a living thing. Okay, so that's one part of myself is my life, right? All right. So what do I do in life? Well, the number one thing we probably do is try to stay alive, right? I think that's kind of the thing we always do, and that typically takes on certain behaviors, and one of those is, of course, acquiring sustenance, acquiring shelter, acquiring defense, acquiring all the things, comfort, those
Yeah.
things that make life better. And so when we get these things that we are working toward with our free labor, that's our labor that we own, that's our property. We have property. And so that's kind of, I think that we can argue that's our self too. It's just the expression of ourself, our past. That's the expression of what we've done. And then, of course, if I own my life and I own my property, I need to be able to direct them at my will, which is my liberty. So I believe in
Mm.
this triune self. I believe that you are composed of property, life, and liberty. And I believe that those are the 3 elements that form your being, yourself. And if you own you and I own me, well, then instantly sort of some ground rules are established, right? I mean,
Here
I
we are with the non-aggression
here
principle.
we are. I mean, I can't take from you
Right.
by force anything that
Right.
which I want to, and you can't, me.
And
And
an
I,
extension of the non-aggression principle
yeah,
is an anti-taxation stance because the idea is you're taking my property at the threat of by coercion.
yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, you're already kind of ahead of it, right? I mean, I think that it's the most moral, political philosophy. Now, look, I'm completely willing to admit that all philosophy exists in philosophy classes and practicality exists out here in the world. This is a very nuanced place with 8 billion different selves and all different power dynamics and structures. And some things long acquired, some things long entrenched, some things may take generations to change, some things may change tomorrow. So I never claim to have a practical answer for everything from a philosophical standpoint, and I can't. I don't know of a single philosophy that does, to be quite honest. Um, but I can say that I know that those things are true. I know that I'm a self. I know that you're a
Right.
self. I know that that it's wrong for me to hurt you or take your stuff. It's wrong for you to hurt me and take my
Right.
stuff.
This is the
Uh,
basis of property law.
yeah, exactly. This is Thomas Locke. This is the
And this
basic.
is
Yeah,
exactly why law school, when I say, when I, regurgitate my story ad nauseum on X, because I have an intention need issue. um, um, when I get to it, part of the story is, well, I started to shift to the right just by the virtue of the core law school curriculum, namely property law, because I was like, oh, that's what's going on in our society.
right.
It's all about property. This is all about property here. And then fast forward to my final year where I took those critical race theory electives. We can get to that another time. So yeah, property, and so much of this about, and then we can get into at some point also why progressivism isn't the way, and address those
Yeah,
concerns, because the idea seems to be here for libertarians, and I'm attracted to it. One of my mentors in life, one of my best friends, he's, I don't know, what has he got? He's got 14 years on me, and he's a super successful strength and fitness life coach kind of guy. And
nice.
it's like, ownership, man. So that's what it's all about: self ownership, accountability. So the mind of a business owner, but not everybody has that. But the idea is that our society should be built around the assumption that most people have it, you should have it, and you should use it. And that makes sense to me. That seems natural. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, like I'm a very visual thinker, and sometimes I equate things to sort of pictures and structures that may not actually be practical. But I kind of view that as like the Lego of the world. Property ownership, self ownership, the self, what that is, and we should, I think, in my mind, form all structures and interactions based off that kind of concept. Like that's the byte, the one or the zero of
Right.
the machine is what I kind of think. And so you are asked earlier, going back to your original question, you said, do I believe that government is an unnatural entity? I don't think so, and here's why. We'll jump forward here in the discussion a little bit, and we'll come back. But I consider myself a minarchist.
Okay.
Um,
I
uh,
was wondering. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I consider myself. I consider that that's kind of my North Star. My ideal is that there's a few proper roles of government, and I would, ideally, we should be pursuing that and trying to get to that place. I'm not an anarchist, and one of the reasons I'm not now, first off, there's not much I can argue with from an anarchy perspective. Okay,
Right.
I'll be quite honest. And in fact, if you talk to a really, really intelligent anarchist, you'll have a hard time arguing
Right.
a lot of things.
Right.
But I believe that what ultimately happens, no matter what, whether there's a structure that you've defined or not, we seem to have always organized into some sort of system where there's kind of like an ultimate arbiter, right? That's kind of a proper function of government. And there's somebody that's there to sort of organize us to help protect all of our quote unquote rights and property. Whether this has happened tribally, like in the Amazon jungle, or it's happened, I think throughout history. I think that, again, imagine tomorrow the U.S. government's wiped out. There's no such thing as government, and all that's left is like your, condo building or whatever. It's something would eventually self-organize where there was something to,
Hmm.
mediate disputes and say who was right,
Right.
who was wrong. There would be some sort of neighborhood watch that would exist. There'd be some pooling of resources that would happen. There'd be some give and take that would occur. So yeah, I don't think that government's unnatural. I think the unnatural part, the part to me that feels like the mental gymnastics,
Hmm.
and I tell people this all the time. The only thing, libertarianism is actually very common sense, right? It's not that there's not a lot of hard thinking you have to do.
Right.
The mental gymnastics in the world is how we get from I don't have a right to take from you by force, and you don't me, but now all of a sudden this guy in this uniform does. How did we do that? Because you see, I have the if I own myself and that's my property, my liberty, my life, and
You
my
have not only the right, but the duty.
right. And so I can assign my rights, right? I can assign you my property. I can assign you my labor. I
Yeah.
can say, hey, Brian, I'm going to go work for you for free. I'll just work for you. I can do that anything I want to, but I can't assign something I don't have, right? And again, this is a law concept, right? It would be like, again, this is essentially what, would be counterfeiting, right? If I was like, hey, I'm going to go write you an option on this contract, but I don't possess the contract. right? There'd be a problem there.
Right.
And that contract doesn't even exist. Maybe the contract itself would be illegal. There wasn't the consideration. There wasn't the things that made a contract, right? Okay, so you're back to first year
Yeah.
law. Yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I just had a pain in my chest.
Yeah. So, I mean, imagine a scenario like that where like you are unethically writing an option on a contract that was never in a contract to begin with that you don't possess.
Right.
And then beginning to structure things based off that agreement. I think that's the unnatural part
And
of
so
the world.
what is that? What is the practical? What are we looking at practically then, based on that insight? What parts of government are that way?
I think that we could. How much time do we have? Right. There's a lot of parts of government that are that way. Again, anything that essentially funds itself with threats of violence or force or extortion or theft of property. That's
So we are talking.
unacceptable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does the minarchist then do? Like, what does taxation look like for a minarchist?
Yeah,
That's a
good.
better
That's a
question.
great question.
Yeah.
So, ideally, I think that in a perfect world, people have considerations for what they purchase, and they purchase them based off what the incentives that best serve them. Right? Nobody forced you to purchase the type of webcam you did. Nobody forced you to purchase the microphone you did. Nobody forces you to pay your cell phone bill. If you don't pay it, you just don't have service. Right? But we have this weird place in society, like, we've made it a law that says, hey, if somebody shows up at the hospital dying, you got to take care of them. We've compelled the labor of somebody, that doctor, that nurse, right?
Right.
And so we have to compensate them.
Perfect example, by the way. I don't want to take you
Right.
off your flow. Please keep your
Yeah.
book. But a
So
perfect example.
Yeah.
Make your point, and then address what the progressive would say about that.
Right. So we have our first quandary here. We would say, yes, life is precious. If somebody shows up at a hospital, of course we want them to have to take care of them. We don't want them to say, you don't have any money, get out of here, you homeless guy, and go die
Right.
in the street. That's not good for society. That's not good for us. That's not good. None of us would think that was good. But the problem is we have compelled someone's labor, right? We've compelled a doctor and a nurse and the janitor, anybody there that's trying to earn a living off that facility, again, funding itself. So I think if we compelled their labor, if we don't pay them, we've made them a slave, right? Just to compel their labor. And they've agreed to say, yeah, you can compel my labor whenever you want to, but I need to be compensated, right? So we have this almost quote unquote socialist idea now, right? Where we have a society have done something. The progressive would say, hey, we're going to extract your labor under threat of imprisonment and coercion, and we're going to pool that centrally and then pay for that homeless guy to get his health care, right? We may say, hey, as part of our healthcare plans that we all pay, 5% of that we have elected to go to facilities for these issues. Now, you can elect not to, or you can elect to have it, right? The benefit of having it is you're a decent person. I think most people would elect that. I mean, look at organ donation, right? I mean, people, you don't have to force people to be organ donors. There's a lot of people out there that do that. I believe that most people are pretty good. I really do.
That's interesting.
So I think that that's kind of one way. And the other way is there's some arguments that could be made that sales and excise taxes on new items only that involve other people's labor. So, for instance, if I bake a loaf of bread in my kitchen and I'm selling it at a farmer's market, that's not really a new item, But if I own maybe a cupcake factory and there's like 100 employees and I'm packaging cupcakes and selling them, at gas stations, maybe you can make the argument that sales and excise taxes on new items only and only one time could be considered a pseudo voluntary form of taxation, because you don't have to purchase those things, right? You could at some way. There's some optional out. There's ability for you to naturally procure your own food, naturally procure your own shelter. You can, make your own clothes, buy used clothes. You don't have to buy a new car. You don't have to buy a new bicycle, right?
So that's the intellectual property right validation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's already been paid on once. Somebody already paid the bill, and so it's already done. Those are two kind of practical maybe ways that you could do it. I really like though Spike Cohen's idea, for instance, of when you buy a car or a home. A lot of the big purchases in our life we purchase under the guise of, if I have an issue, I have access to a court system law. I have access to a final arbiter to make right if I'm wronged. If I'm sold a lemon, if I was deceived, if I was defrauded. I purchase a real estate transaction and they intentionally hide the fact that there's a massive, witch's grave under the foundation they know about, right? And they tell me everything's fine. And so I might go seek recompense for that, right? Well, the idea that you'd have a voluntary fee. You'd say, hey, look, 5% fee on that. You have access to the court system. Don't pay it, you don't. End of story.
Mm.
And so me and you, we're best friends. I own a little chunk of land. You want to buy it from me. You're like, we don't need to pay that fee. Mike's a good guy. We're good. But you might go out and buy a property from somebody else and you don't know. And you're like, well, yeah, I want to pay that fee. It could be rolled into the mortgage. Some people would offer to split it. Some people would say, we're paying the fee. And I like Spike's example of like a used car lot. It's like, if you come on down to Brian's used cars, I pay the fee because I know that the cars that I sell you are worth everything and they're very well, we take care of them. We're not defrauding you. So you always know when you come to Brian's used cars that we're paying the fee. And that would be a way that would be, again, a voluntary mechanism that would fund, quote unquote, government, these ideas without, again, exercising force or coercion against you. Because right now the model is we're first in line to your labor, and then we have first title on your property. Like we have title and fee of pretty much everything in America, right?
Right.
We're allowed to occupy it as long as we're paying the crown,
Right.
their
Right.
fee. Yeah.
So libertarianism really is, and I spoke to a few of the presidential candidates. I had the honor of doing that earlier this year. That was my first introduction to it, and
Nice.
now I am getting, I'm not just saying this, probably like the best, just straightforward. Like now you're hitting me with it again, a refresher course, a really great refresher course, shall I say?
Okay, good.
And my thought is, this really is about returning to a purely property-driven system where it's all about getting the distortions out of that property system. It's all about efficiency, and so I understand that, and that makes sense, not only intellectually but practically. Like I said, the fitness friend that I have, it makes sense to be to for an organism, for ourselves, all of that, to be taking units, to be taking care of themselves, being self-sufficient. So the question, of course, always becomes, and it's not just no, it is because I come from the left. Is it enough? And that's what the great thinkers on the left. Is it really enough?
Yes. What do we do about? What do we?
Yeah.
We've seen some ill and something sad and something's
Yes.
wrong. Yeah,
Yes.
and we have compassion. And again, I do.
100%.
We all do. I think that again, you are a terrible human being if you do not see somebody without, and that doesn't sting a little bit, right?
Right. Right.
But I have a real issue with compassion, and the answer to compassion are being forced. I don't think that there's any sort of moral superiority in forcing people to pay for something. If I have to starve one to feed another, I've committed no right.
Hmm.
And I think that that's where a lot of this comes to. And then again, it also pre-assumes something. We talked about the equality of these units of the selves. It pre-assumes that somebody knows best what's right or wrong. Last I checked, Brian, it's still wrong for me to take from you by force, even if what I'm going to spend it on I think is good for you.
Well, that's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
libertarianism is so based on the property rights and the founding of our country, I would say.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, which is to say that no, that is the most moral thing you can do is respect this system, whereas it's not necessarily utilitarian.
I mean, I think that it's utilitarian, the fact that it works. I think what the odd part about it is, and I hate to use these terms, collective individualism, collectivism, but they sort of self-form themselves. I think they're a little bit muddied into what they mean, but I think that focusing on the collective typically has some pretty large moral hazards. It can work from time to time, but when it goes bad, it goes really, really bad. Like we get genocides. You get all kind of really bad things that happen sometimes from collectivism. And again, when you focus on individuals and individualism, yes, it works a lot of time. And sometimes when it doesn't, you get some bad things, but they're not typically huge bad things because they're happening on an individual level, right? But I think that when we focus on the individual, the irony is that's good for the collective.
Right.
And I think that's and again, going back to, like you said, that property system, these units of organized property ownership, which we call the individual.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you run any other system is you'd say, hey, how are they all doing? Where's the weak link, right? Where is this? And so, I mean, the question of, is it enough? I think presupposes this idea that there can be more artificially created than what there is. Okay. And I don't know if that ever is the case. No one can really show me and I've challenged a couple people to this. No one can show me a progressive sort of system that didn't basically, in the way it was organized originally, have the roots of its failure pre-planned. And what I mean by that is like there was this mortal flaw that was introduced early on, and the idea was that you just wouldn't see it until the person that put it in place was long gone. Most social programs that are funded by force and coercion currently, Social Security being probably the highlight one, they are organized a lot like Ponzi schemes. They sound really good in the beginning. You're promised something really nice, maybe a quote unquote unnatural return. I mean, imagine you're in the 1930s and someone tells you, Brian, you don't have to work. When you're done working, you don't got to worry about anything. We spent all of human history thinking we had to worry about what was going to happen at the end of our lives, right? And now we don't have to worry about something.
Right.
That's kind of an unrealistic return. It hasn't ever happened in human history. Because that's kind of weird. I mean, our Social Security before was our kids and our family and
Right.
our churches and who we would rely on. And that would be kind of our Social Security. So that sounds a little weird. And they go, yeah, but you know what? The government's going to back it up. Okay, well, how's it going to be funded? Well, it's going to be funded by the people working today. Oh, that sounds great. And it's just a little bit. It's not a big deal. And we've told them, hey, we're helping you guys. And they're cool with that. And they voted for it. And that's going to be fine. But you've built in, again, this Ponzi scheme because as people begin to age, you end up with, at some point in time, less workers to beneficiaries. And that's where you are. And again, you're always paying people off with benefits from the current investors, the current workers, right?
Right.
And so it really is sort of a Ponzi scheme, sort of built into it. Again, there's nothing at odds, I think, ideologically wrong with social programs and the government organizing them if they're funded voluntarily or in some voluntary mechanism. I just tend to find that they're never very efficient, and I don't think they organize in very good principles. Because again, part of self-ownership is that fear of failure. The reason that you take care of yourself is because you're worried of what might happen if you don't, right? And like, why don't you go jump off a balcony right now? Well, because you probably have bad consequences for it, right? But imagine all of a sudden tomorrow, like you can jump off balconies. There's foam pads put by the government under every balcony all over the world, and people just start jumping out of balconies. Well, what happens if those go away? And so that's where we are today. I think is we're in the conversation now of how do you really realize a less coercive system when we've become such a large welfare state, right? And that's where I think that's a conversation I'm willing to have that I think is both intellectually honest and I believe also logically consistent. Because again, we're balancing how do we care for people with not doing more harm, and I always use the sort of like the Chihuahua example, which is if you put a Chihuahua out in the woods in the wilderness, it'll probably die, right? It's not a wolf. It might have came from a wolf, but it's not a wolf. We bred it generationally into a Chihuahua, and it might take generations to breed out.
Right.
Now that's a little bit inside in some libertarian circles. That idea right there is very. There's a lot of debate on that. That can be a really
and I get that sense. That's really interesting. It's a slide. You're saying it's a slide, and you can't jump. You can't warp speed.
All right. I call it incrementalism, practicalism. This idea we got here incrementally, we get away incrementally. There's some people that say you don't believe in liberty if you think that if tomorrow everything went away, it would find a way to work out, and maybe they're correct. I just know when I look at things from a political example and political practicality, you're always up against some headwinds, in politics. And, one of those, a big one for taxation is always revenue neutrality. There's this built-in assumption that you have to replace the dollar amount you already have, right? And so you say, we're going to abolish this tax. And someone goes, well, how will we pay for it? And you hear that question. And so I think that probably politically to sell these ideas, to sort of get to where people, the proof of concept, as we talked about very early on, is you incrementally get there. Maybe one small tax is replaced with one less coercive one, and then so on and so on and so on. And if we keep these principles up, if we're lucky, we get to maybe a less coercive state at some point in time. And again, I'm fully aware that we never get there perfectly, but I think the idea is, what is your goal?
Right.
And I have the same goals the progressives do. I want educated children. I want healthy people.
That's the through line.
Yeah. I want all the things they want. The difference is, I think that the way that I go about them is the only way you actually get them. That's just
which is to put the responsibility on people to, it really is bootstraps. Is it?
And I'm not even saying bootstraps because but you're right. I mean, let's talk about, for instance, the progressive idea of universal health care. Who doesn't want universal health care, first off? I think we all should have. Who doesn't want health care for everybody? You're kind of an asshole if you say you don't, right?
Right.
Okay. So I'm not against universal health care, but I am against single payer health care. Okay. I think, universal health care sounds wonderful. Why am I against single payer health care? Well, single payer health care ignores the fact that there's millions and millions of people with responsibilities they should have over their own bodies. If I'm forced to pay for your health care, Brian, and you start eating cheeseburgers every day.
So is this the risk pool?
Yeah.
So single payer is the risk pools, and now a healthy guy is bearing the rest of a guy stuff on his face.
Or just, again, like, Medicare for all, you might call it, or anything else. And this, again, this idea that you would, under what you could possibly even do it voluntarily, but under threat of coercion, you have this, pool of money paying for healthcare for people. I think at last count, you can go verify this. I want to say maybe 35% of all healthcare costs in America are related to obesity, which is a lifestyle choice. Most of that's a lifestyle choice. I mean, I think some of the science would say that some isn't, but these people are making decisions, and then me and you are forced to pay for them. Or maybe I start doing bad things, and you're forced to pay for me. Also, it ignores the fact that the real thing we should be chasing is the lowest cost unit possible. So whether you and I are pulling our money to pay for insulin for everybody, or we're paying insulin for ourselves, we want the unit cost of insulin, the true cost, to be as low as possible. That benefits both scenarios, right? Because if insulin's $10 a unit and we're pulling our money, or it's $1 a unit and we're pulling our money, we get more insulin if it's $1 a unit. And if it's $1 a unit, do we even need to pull our money? And so, again, that's why I think that we should chase cost efficiencies over socialized answers, because, again, the socialized answer begins to ignore the cost efficiency model, which causes things to break down.
So you're saying that so the way because my question was going to be, how do you do Medicare for all, without doing a single payer? So is the answer, break it down, privatize, drive costs down, let the market do its thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you let the market do its thing, and I think you go back to a regime of where, again, healthcare is affordable, and the ability to volunteer for healthcare and give healthcare as volunteers is also a practical mechanism. Everything has gotten so expensive in healthcare these days. It's outpaced inflation 5-to-1 since the 1970s. I think it's almost now 6-to-1. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's a place that government is most involved. We've put on layers and layers and layers of mandates on people and things and places, and how we pay and who we pay and when we pay and why we pay and what you have to have and how you have to have it. And we've done all this under the guise of safety, right? And we're going to make everybody safe. And I don't think that we've, number one, made anybody more safe. I think that what we've done is we've essentially created a very mediocre system for everybody. That's, again, very expensive and very impractical. And the answer is more mediocrity and more impracticality. It's like, well, we kind of pulled everything together and it's not working well, so let's go ahead and pull all of it together, And so, again, I'm much about the whole theme of this is I believe that all systems are a sum total of the parts. And so if you are focusing on the units that create the system and making those the best that you can, your system, if you allow it to self-organize, will be the best outcome you can get. And it will never be perfect, because the units of society, people, are imperfect. Right. But I don't want to give imperfect people absolute power, which is kind of
that's the argument. That's the minarchy libertarianism argument right there. Is the model must be rooted in this property, rigid, rule-based system where ownership, self-ownership, and self-responsibility is the key. And because people are imperfect, there will be a need for government, but not the way we're doing it.
Yeah, not the way we're doing it. Yeah. And that's really kind of where it is. And so, but you bring up, again, a good point. You talked about your fitness coach, life coach friend who's been very successful. And he talks about ownership, right? You don't get results with anything in your life, Brian, if you don't own the outcomes. Yeah. If you're blaming everything else all the time, you never get there, right? And there's a reason why there's not a single life coach or physical, whatever guy out there that's going to tell you, man,
stick your hand out.
Yeah, exactly. That's just go out there and beg and plead and tell everybody you're a victim, and that's how you're going to get ahead. Right. Nobody's going to tell you that, right? Because that's not going to work. Right. You have to take self-ownership. And so we've created a society where we have less and less incentives to do that. And so no wonder everything seems to be falling apart to the wayside. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because things do feel that way, and we don't really have time to go into a whole culture war conversation, but I'm sure we could have a really interesting one. Um, it does feel that way. That's really interesting. The idea that big government could be the cause, that we're not, because we're no longer, it's unnatural. It's unnatural, and we're becoming unnatural. So disconnected from consequences. Give me a minute or two, or three or four on, pardon me, why people say we have a uniparty and that Americans feel like they're getting a bad deal. They get jack in return. We got this hurricane. What can
Yeah.
you tell me about that?
So why we have a uniparty is because, again, power always tends to do its best to protect its own power. And I think that, the Declaration of Independence says, derived from the just powers of the consent of the governed. And to me, that means like, okay, what just powers are? Again, I think that they're these minimal functions of government. And consent, I believe, is something you can exercise immediately and take away immediately. That's what I think consent is. And I think most people would agree with me on that.
That's fair.
I can't consent to something forever. Again, I think in law, you might find that to be an improper contract, right? Here, you have me for no matter what forever. I bet you that's thrown out of court. There's no consideration there. So without consent, well, surely we consented, Michael. Somebody voted at some point in time. Well, I didn't decide, right? I didn't decide this. Somebody else decided it. And even if I decided, I can't decide it for you. I think when you have any system that can feed and drive itself and sustain itself without your consent and permission, it will never, ever do anything but grow, work in its own interest, and it will never behave. It will never do what you want it to do because there's no incentive for it to do so.
So that's why the libertarians always talk about ballot access, because it's these barriers, it's the system preventing real change from happening. The uniparty, the idea is we have this big government and it's entrenched and it's self-serving and it's it's doing what it needs to do to survive, and it's keeping people out.
Yeah, we have a corporatocracy now. Like I think Theo Vaughn of all people said it. We have like privatized communism, and I love that term because it really is kind of what we got, right? I mean,
tell me more about that.
Yeah, so Walmart, big business in Arkansas. Their headquarters is in Arkansas. Walmart does a lot of business with the government, obviously. A lot of their business comes from EBT, food stamps. The government taxes you and I, and they give these to less fortunate people. And less fortunate people, they go and buy groceries at Walmart, and Walmart gets that revenue. Interestingly enough, they also get to cut their costs because of it. It wasn't too long after these programs were introduced that Walmart realizes they can pay their employees a less of a wage and then put them on food stamps. In fact, you'll ask a number of Walmart employees who've been throughout the company. One of the first things they'll do is say, "Here's your food stamp application," because you're paying you a wage that's beneath a living wage. And so, you, the producer out here in the economy, you are providing input to a corporation's bottom line, and you're also reducing cost to make their bottom line higher, and you haven't received a single share of stock for doing so.
Are the EBTs only good at Walmart?
No, they're good at all kinds of places, but Walmart, it gets a lot of money from them. Again, grocery stores in general, but Walmart, it gets a lot of them because in a lot of towns, especially in the South, Walmart might be the only place in town, right? And so I'm kind of picking on them, but I don't know the number that comes from that, but it's significant. I'll tell you, it's very significant. And again, so we have this entrenched system. And so what does Walmart really want? Does Walmart really want there to be a free market? No, that's the last thing they want. What Walmart wants is they want a politician in there who will make sure the status quo is protected. Because again, they get free revenue and they get reduced cost, and they don't have to issue stock to do so. All they have to do is buy political power, this monopoly of force and violence that government is. And so I tell people all the time, this is the same model as we had in medieval Europe. There is a king, a central power, and then there are lords and then serfs. And the serfs believe that the king's job is to protect the serfs from the lords, because the king says, you can petition me for any grievance you have. Come to me. If your lord unfairly taxed you or taxed your lands, come talk to me. And the serf goes, hey, they took 10 goats from me. I can't be made whole. And he goes, yeah, you know what? We've restricted recompense to lords to 1 goat for 10. So here's your 1 goat back. right? And you go, that sucks. Well, that's how we have now: forced arbitration, class action, mediation, these sort of things, right?
Mm.
Government exists now to protect the corporations from you and I. They don't protect us from the corporations. And that's just a symptom of any system, again, that gets to sustain itself without permission. So they don't have to borrow with our permission, and they don't have to fund themselves with our permission. You make a dollar, they're first to it. If they don't have enough money, they will print it. If they can't print it, they'll borrow it from somebody else, right? And they'll keep funding it. And so that to me is the consent mechanism. Yeah.
So how do we divest corporate from government power? Because it seems to me that people from all across the political spectrum will say, "Yeah, that's a good goal. I don't
Right.
care where you are on this thing, even if you're a
Right.
libertarian, not on the political spectrum." So how do we do that?
Again, I think that all of this comes down to your ability to give the system or not give the system. I think that like the Bud Light effect is interesting to me because
Mm,
it's a sure example of people saying, I don't like what you've done and I'm no longer going to give you my money. I don't know. I'm not sitting on one side of that argument or the other, by the way. I don't drink alcohol.
right.
But I think that government should work exactly the same way, meaning that we fund it and we allow it to we participate in it at our consent.
Okay.
And when
So
it
the
yeah,
voluntariness solves pretty much corruption. It just solves
again,
corruption.
it solves corruption because again, let's say for instance, this FEMA thing right now with North Carolina is going on. Right? They've spent all the FEMA money. We don't have enough to give them because we spent it all over here. And people go, you know what? I'm not giving you any more money because all you do is you send it over here to
Right.
overseas places, and then when it comes time that we need to help somebody here, you don't have any anymore. No, I'm not giving you any more money. Well, we can't pay the politicians' salaries without it. Well, find some new politicians,
Right.
right? I think that is it. I mean, again, I imagine that government's supposed to work for us, and if you've ever trained a horse, horses are trained in many ways, you know, based off risk and reward, right, and based off food. Dogs are certainly trained that way, and government, I think, should be trained that way, which is when it does things we like, fund it. When it doesn't do things when you
Right.
like, stop funding it, and
Right.
that will instantly self-solve these problems.
And there's no feedback, and we're the government. So the idea is we need a third party. You're running for libertarian. The reason you're attracted to this party, is because you're trying to inject some of that feedback mechanism back at some reality, trying to break this thing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this happens locally too. I mean, tangential conversation. I don't believe that the federal government is probably likely to be saved. I think that the question really for us as a nation is we're going to fail as a current republic, just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if. I think that there's some things that might buy some more time, but I think the entrenched mechanisms that are failing, that are causing this failure, they're so overwhelmingly large and self-protected now. I don't think that we
Right.
get them changed.
I was
So,
going to ask
yeah,
you. I was going to
yeah,
ask you. Other than voluntariness, what's the other big wrench in the uh, gears here?
that's
Is
it.
it Federal Reserve? I mean, is there something to say about that?
I don't. Again, the Fed is part of this involuntary, funding mechanism. The Fed stands by basically, essentially, to incentivize poor spending habits by Congress. Right? Congress creates a deficit budget. The deficit's there. They go, hey, U.S. Treasury, go out to the market and sell some treasuries to borrow the money. And the U.S. Treasury goes out there, and then there's partners out there, there's special buyers that buy those treasuries because they know the Fed stands behind them to buy them instantly. And so, you just always they don't have a number they have to work with. And so the
Right.
Federal Reserve again is just another side of that equation,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
of that involuntary funding mechanism. So
Right.
the Federal Reserve in the 16th Amendment, income taxes and the Federal Reserve are really sort of the A and B of this, of what I think the problem with the whole entire system is. And everything that we have that you don't like about government, that everyone doesn't like about government, that they just call it this or they call it this or they call it that, comes from that. The fact that it is funded and grows without your consent.
So for me, if I want to really ponder, if I want to go down this libertarian road, I just think about it. It's focus on A and B. That's the practical side of this politically philosophical conversation we've been having.
Focus on the funding mechanisms. That
Yeah.
is the input into the system. Without funding, it can't do anything, right?
Let me
And
ask you one.
yeah,
Let me ask you a question that I enjoy thinking about.
sure.
What role, if any, do you think technology will have, or should it have any technology on the proper role of government?
I think so. So when I win this election here in Arkansas, because again, I think that local politics really matters because you can nullify bad policy from the Federal Reserve. I mean, from the federal government, and you can affect your local community a little bit better. One thing I really would like to see here in Arkansas and maybe in other states is I'd like to see state finances put on blockchain, and I mean like all the way down to like the penny as it's spent in real time. And I would also like to see public records and voter rolls on blockchain. We all think of blockchain technology as cryptocurrency. That I think that's a neat part of what that technology does. I think it's a much better, um, it's or not much better. It's a very good technology for these two things: for detecting fraud, waste, and abuse, and keeping very good track of your financials, and also creating unalterable public records, which is what we want. We want records that say, "Hey, when Brian Escal went and registered to vote in his county in so and so day on so and so time," we don't want that to be able to be altered unless it's intentionally altered, and then we can say who, when, and why, and how it was intentionally altered, right? So yes, I think that technology, AI, machine learning applied to blockchain on government and state finances will be a very important part of that discussion of how do we get less and less coercive with taxes. Because again, if I walk into the legislature tomorrow and I will be in 2025, I get elected here in November, I'll walk in, I say, hey, we're going to end all income taxes in Arkansas, all corporate taxes, and no more, property taxes on homes in any county, even the first day. They would say, well, Michael, how do we make that revenue up, right? That'd be the argument you would get, is what's the revenue neutral number? What if, we put this system in place and we find out that, hey, we have a $6 billion budget and we're operating off $3 billion, we can do the same job we're doing off 6. Well, all of a sudden now those conversations become a little more amicable and amiable and attainable. And so I think that it has a very, very large role in government.
That's interesting.
If the people are so disposed to do so. Here's where we're going to get, though, I think. One is we have, of course, many old people in government that have no idea what I'm talking about, right? Two, we have
they didn't know how Facebook made money in those years.
Yeah, I mean, they get confused when they push input on the TV. They're like, I don't know what to do. And so that's one of the challenges. And again, we need to have people that are not apathetic. That's always goes back to, we have a very apathetic populace. But I think that's part of the welfare state. You get
another symptom.
Adults, this I don't care, whatever,
And so the question really becomes, how do you? It's interesting. How do you chip away at that? It's interesting if you really believe this.
So I tell people this too. I say that our goal should not be to eliminate welfare tomorrow. It should be to create a tomorrow where it's not needed. So I think that you work on building independent generations. I think that starts again with massive reforms in education at state and local levels, getting a lot of government out of education in many ways, creating financially independent people. And I think as you begin to grow that, I think that you can grow yourself out of this sort of welfare warfare state, because I think those arise mutually too. I think when you have one, you have the other.
Wow.
And again, and I'll even go a little spiritual and religious here on this too. I also am a libertarian. And again, maybe one day I join some other party or I run as somebody else. I'm always going to be a libertarian at heart. Because I think that obviously you can be a libertarian at heart and run as a Republican. I have not seen anybody do it as a Democrat. Maybe one day that will happen. I think the Democrat Party's a little bit, doesn't seem like that's what they want right now. They kind of want.
They're not leaning that way.
They're not leaning that way. No, they're leaning kind of the other way. It's the one political philosophy that aligns with my religion. And being a Christian, there's no other political philosophy that aligns with it. When I'm called to do things, I'm called to do them myself. I'm not called. I can't. When Jesus said, "Hey, go feed the poor, make disciples, do all these things."
This is so important, because the progressive will say we want the government to be as Jesus was.
Right? Yeah, we want. So we're going to. He didn't say go force your neighbor with police to fund the poor, right? He said you go feed the poor, you go do this. Wow. And so and kind of in the Pauline theology sort of things, when Paul was going around spreading the gospel, he didn't go to a new city and go, "Hey, where's the city council and the mayor at, so I can change the laws around here, so that y'all can look like Christians around here," right? He went to the people, because if you have a pious people, it doesn't matter what the law is.
Right.
I think that liberty and virtue arise mutually also. I think you get virtuous people with more liberty because they have consequences they have to answer for. Consequences create cooperation. They create responsibility.
And this is where we get into the good versus evil.
Absolutely. And it all comes back around to that. Like the good habits that make a good world come from those things. And so again, faith without works is dead. That means like again, you have to have kind of both. Those arise mutually. And we've parlayed our spiritual duties to the state. And it's no wonder also the church is failing, because the church no longer feeds the poor. I mean, they have
Yeah.
like some food
Right.
pantries and stuff, but they're not the main
Right.
feed of the
Well,
poor.
it goes hand in hand. These.
Yeah. They no longer, the church was the orphanage, the hospital, the
Yeah.
everything. And I'm not saying it was perfect. And I'm not trying to say that we need some religious theocracy. I want to be very clear about that. What I'm saying, though, is these things that we've always sort of seen, these holes in society, is this enough? We've always had these questions.
Right.
We've answered them in many ways. And I think the way that always seems to work the best is when we answer them voluntarily. I think that always works the best.
Yeah. That's what it comes
Again,
down to.
look right now at North Carolina, no communication.
Right.
We can wait around for FEMA or whatever, or Elon's like, hey, Starlink is free. If you're in that geography, it's totally free. And now we have a NASCAR driver airdropping them in there.
Right.
I mean, nobody had to wait around for government to do that.
Right.
People help people when it's time to. I mean, I was in a tornado here in my own city. It touched down right over here, like one street over, and knocked out 80,000 houses or whatever. And right after that storm, it was people helping people. I wasn't like, well, before I cut this, tree out of the road with my chainsaw, how much are you going to pay me?
Right.
And I wasn't saying, well, what's your political affiliation before I help you
Right.
out? I was just like, we're helping people. Yeah.
Very interesting. No, it's been a great conversation, man. We have a lot of things that I wish we would have had time to talk to, but maybe next time.
Yeah. I mean, we can go on if you want to, but I'm
no,
cool.
I actually got my dad coming. We're gonna grab a burger. I haven't seen him in a little while, so I don't want to miss that.
Yep.
But I only mentioned that I had other things to talk about, only really to say that nonetheless, it's been a really good conversation. It's like I said, a really good review, and I learned more. So it's not just been a pure review; it's a purely great review. You've definitely given me a lot to chew on, man. I mean, and we really brought it home with the good versus evil concept, and that's how a non-conspiratorial way to look at the morality aspect of government. And I come from this family, a progressive upbringing, and this left ideology was really beaten into me, like really, really, really deeply. And so let me just say that I respect the hell out of you.
Thank you.
For many different reasons.
Same.
For many reasons. And I'm really glad that you joined me, and it's been a really helpful conversation. I'm looking for guidance, connecting with thought leaders. That's what I say that I've sought to do. And so this has been really.
I think Brian, where you'll end up eventually is kind of like where I think most people that do, which is you'll probably be a libertarian in all things mentally, and you'll see the world in practicality sometimes, and you'll have to make decisions that don't always fit that.
Right.
But if you're always aiming for it and talking about it with people, that's how we get there.
Right.
Again, you want the same thing the progressive does. I think all good people want the same things.
Yep.
How do we best arrive at those outcomes?
That is exact. I mean, like I said, from the start of this podcast, it's been, what is the proper role of government? And don't we all want the same thing? So I really mean it when I say this has been super helpful to me. Where can we go to support you?
Yes, please do support me. MW4liberty.com has all my socials there. This is, again, we're going to come down to crunch time at election right here. We got 32 days. We do need some more donors to step up. We're about to be $8,000 lighter in the campaign budget because we just had a large expenditure. And if you want to see a libertarian elected to a state legislature, if you are one of those 2/3 of Americans out there who want to see a third party in politics, then it starts with putting libertarians not just in your city councils and your school boards, but in your state legislatures. And I think that starts with proof of concept. I think that starts with someone like me who goes in and does it practically and incrementally and says, hey, I want the people in my district to say, yeah, some of those libertarians are really crazy, but we love ours. He's doing a great job. And if we can get more to say that, then I think we'll do well.
Very strong argument, man. I encourage anyone who is remotely moved by this conversation to absolutely go support you, because you're the best, of the, what can be said. You've got your heart's in the right place. Your mind is sharp. So you'd be crazy not to support you if you were a libertarian.
Well, Brian, I'm very, again, that's very humbling for you to say that, because I really do respect you and the journey you've been on, and it's been interesting to watch. And so I'll keep supporting you as well and rooting for you. You're one of the good guys, man. So keep it up.
Thanks, brother. You got a donation from me coming right after this.
Wow. Thank you very much.
You've won me over. So there's one.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate your time, man. I know you're busy. Thank you.
Let's do this again soon. Take care, buddy.
Look forward to it. Take care. Bye.